Dance around the park, James, and don't spare the horses.
It's showtime.
All right, and welcome in to this special edition of On the Ledge, your Ontario Politics podcast. No, we do not have the roundtable crew with us this week. Taking a bit of a break now that the legislature has risen for the summer. But if need be, and when need be, we'll call the troops back in and start talking about the things that are politics around the table. But in the meantime, there are stories that are developing right now that you need to pay attention to and that land directly on the Premier's desk and on the Finance Minister's desk. Now, you may know that we marked Tax Freedom Day here in Canada this week, and that pretty much means that you have rendered unto Caesar all that is owed to Caesar. That is to say, you spent more than 5 months so far working this year alone in the calendar year just to pay your income tax bill. Good news is the rest of the year between now and December 31, you get to work for yourself. So all that money's yours. Okay. And that tends to stick in the craw of tax advocacy groups across the country. It probably should, when you think about it. But what if I told you that hundreds, if not thousands of businesses across Ontario were getting huge property tax subsidies, while thousands more, those businesses are being forced to overpay their property tax to the tune of hundreds of millions, if not billions of dollars every year, all because of the Ford government's municipal property assessment policy. I know this sounds like we're way down in the weeds, but I want you to remember this as we start the conversation. This is the government that has grown Ontario's debt to record levels while boasting that it has never raised a tax since coming to office 8 years ago this month. Still, it sits by and watches as businesses across this province are overpaying their property taxes, all because of Queen's Park's willful ignorance or mismanagement, whatever you want to call it. Now, don't take my word for it. I caught up with Paul Sullivan recently. Paul is a principal and practice leader for advocacy and tax policy at Ryan ULC. It's one of Canada's largest business tax firms. Now, he and his team analyzed more than 3,000 commercial property sales across Ontario between 2023 and 2025. In Toronto, Mississauga, and London alone, they identified 293 properties. That's about 10% of all the properties they looked at just in those three municipalities. Those 293 properties collectively overpaid an estimated $26.7 million in property taxes in 2025. It's an important story. I want you to spend the next half hour or 40 minutes or so with us. Paul's going to join us to explain it, and then I need you to kind of respond. We need to hear from you. If you're a small business, if you're paying your property tax, and you're looking at your bill, you didn't realize it, maybe you look at it now differently and find out you are paying far more property tax than you should be here in the province of Ontario. Paul Sullivan, thanks for joining us. I know we're going to talk about like way down in the weeds, really wonkish stuff, but I can't impress upon people enough. And I have a hard time doing this, and maybe you'll be able to help me do this, how important it is to understand the effect and the impact of your property tax.
Yeah, well, thank you, Dave, and I appreciate the opportunity to talk with you and your listeners on this topic. It's one that Ontario, unfortunately, has really got themselves out of line with the rest of North America. We're 10 years out of date. We're taxing people at assessed values based upon 2016. And, the markets change and policies with government are created to deal with situations. But when you impose a policy on a market, and a market that moves because it changes with different demand and factors, you have to adapt your policies as the market change. And because we haven't done so, we've created this massive unfairness in property taxation. So I'm hope to break that down for you today and explain where we're at.
Well, I just want you to know that I start from the premise that property tax by their nature are massively unfair. It's feudal. So I'm going to start with that in terms of what I'm getting for the value for my dollar and my tax dollar. But let's go back to the idea of the assessment. And I think not a lot of people understand the mechanism there, that this is not necessarily something that's driven by your municipality, that here in Ontario, there's a way of assessing properties in various municipalities, depending on market and all those sorts. It gets a little complicated, but they don't do it every year. And it's not necessarily based on the sale price of your house.
Well, okay, the gold standard of taxation is to assess it every year. And British Columbia does it, and Alberta does it. The prairies do it every 2 years. Ontario was doing it every 4 years. The idea of a regular assessment cycle is it creates predictability and certainty about, where I will be at next year. So I'm going to throw a word at you. It's ad valorem. Ad valorem means we pay property tax based upon our share of the value, okay? The value of the whole roll or the properties within my class. And so value times tax rate equals my property taxes. And as properties change in value, your share of the property tax burden shifts as well. So what we have, particularly in the commercial market, is certain types of properties that are escalating, other types of properties that are devaluing relative to the average. Okay, so if we're to get a real understanding of this thing, unpack, our taxing authority on Ontario, says that commercial properties since 2016 have changed on average 108%. They've increased in value. So that doesn't mean that your taxes are going up by that extent. When we freeze the assessment roll, what that means is your taxes are going up based upon the municipal budget change. So you have two things going on here. You've got my change in value relative to the average, and you have a municipal budget change. So when you freeze values, you fix on historical relationships between property types, and you keep adding to that the municipal budget change. And that is where the unfairness starts to appear. And so in ad valorem taxation, it is a key measure of fairness, the ability to pay, the economic health of a property is measured by its changing value. As properties go up in value, rents go up, values go up, their share of the tax burden goes up. But what if we don't do that? What if the properties like our retail malls or our local independent businesses throughout our high streets, what if those values are frozen and tax rates keep going up because budgets keep going up? There's no shifting that's occurring with the economic level these properties are performing at.
So let me ask you something just to distinguish in terms of, you're talking about freezing the value in terms of the assessment, the official assessments being done by government agencies, and not necessarily the sale value of that property, which can be two different things.
Right. So in a normal system where we assess annually or biannually, your sale prices will be quite similar to your assessed values, right? Yep. And that's what we generally will call a market value system.
So when we've got that gap, and you go back to 2016, 10 years, lots happened in the past 10 years, and just to shake your head, lots happened in the last 10 months.
Yeah,
that has affected those values, right? So the ability to pay, and we always talk about it, property tax primarily as a residential property tax, because that's what we're all familiar with, and that carries a good deal of the municipal burden. The portion of the commercial tax is something different again. And the reason is, from my perspective, is that my house is going to go up and down based on the market value of real estate in my neighborhood, period. But if I own a coffee shop, it's going to go up and down based on location, et cetera. But it's also going to go up and down based on people's willingness to buy my coffee. So that is another component here that it kind of adds a worm to the can. It's a little bit complicated, no?
Well, that's what I call this ability to pay, or the economic barometer of our real estate. And that's why a market value system with frequent reassessments functions well. Because where we have properties that are overperforming and in high demand, and if we don't adjust the tax burden with those, you create artificial inputs to the market value of the property. So if you can imagine, the property taxes on a property should be $12 per square foot, but they're frozen at $5 per square foot. Suddenly, you're changing the economic inputs to valuation and creating artificial values. And it's not appropriate for property tax distribution.
So in one of your recent blogs on Substack, you listed a number of locations that you had surveyed here in the GTA. And
Yes.
you had determined that a significant number of them were, for all intents and purposes, being overtaxed. They're based on this. Walk me through that, because in some cases, your assessed value was higher than the sale price, or it was lower than the sale price, but they were still being overtaxed.
Right. Okay. So if you can imagine that the average increase is 108%, that means the tax rates would have reduced due to the value change, right? When values go up, tax rates go down. Okay. But if you are selling today at the assessed value from 2016, it means my value didn't go up. It means my relative value didn't change, but the overall value went up 108%. So the properties that went up should have picked up an additional share of the tax burden, but that didn't happen, right? And so what I've done is we've analyzed 3,000 sales in Toronto. We did a study in Toronto, and we looked at the types of properties which performed under the average. And that's the basis of the analysis. So if I'm changing at below the average, it means I am bearing a greater and greater share per year of the tax burden. And if I look at the type of properties that are underperforming relative to the average, it's our local independent businesses. It's our community retail. It's our coffee shop, our butchers, our bakers. And, I went down Bloor Street and I went and talked to all these merchants, because that's what I do as an advocate. I go to the street and I say, listen, do you know what's going on? Do you understand this? And Dave, it's complicated. People don't understand, and people are trying to run their small businesses, and this is kind of voodoo to them. And I think that's why it's gone on so long, because I believe if people truly understood how unfairly treated they were being used here, this would have changed by now. So, for instance, I went down Bloor Street a couple weeks ago and talked to a half a dozen retailers. I said, "Hey, do you realize that you're paying $18,000 too much in property taxes this year?" They didn't understand, and they didn't understand how they could get to that place. And to try and explain the math to them was very difficult. But that's why I'm getting involved. I'm doing an education piece. I've always represented the business improvement associations and small business. I'm going out to the market. I'm saying, guys, you got to pay attention to this. You're really not paying your fair share, and it's impacting your survival, right?
So let me ask you then. I appreciate the fact. I mean, you're talking to a guy who made a career in journalism, so numbers are meaningless to me. So, but I understand the need to make sure that we dig down and have some level of accountability around them. The businesses themselves are in the business of selling shoes or coffee or whatever. They're not in the business of accounting and making sure that they understand the tax system. Let me ask you though, if they don't understand it, do you have any confidence whatsoever that the folks in the finance departments and the ministries across the country have a real good handle on how this works?
Well, I'm glad you asked that, Dave, because I'm meeting with them weekly. I have several meetings per week with, whether it's a finance critic or the Minister of Finance or his staff, and I've presented all my math to them. These are the guys that are figuring all this out. MPAC's doing their valuations every year. The numbers are available, and from what I've presented to political staff and politicians, they're like, we know, we get it. I'm like, okay, so what are we doing about it? And I think, there's this, doesn't seem to be some urgency about it because the taxpayer, the stakeholder, doesn't understand it. And it's not until that happens that we'll create the urgency that we can create change. But what we do know, Dave, is that the longer we leave this, the bigger the mess it is. And, there's been 2 other instances of a freeze in Canada's recent history. I'm not talking about the old Ontario freeze. And both of those provinces got out of it within 2 years. To be 10 years out, it's not acceptable in tax policy. Every academic would tell you it's bad tax policy.
So when you look at this and needless to say, coming out of COVID, retail, restaurants, hospitality, they're all struggling on so many levels. How much of this is a hidden, minefield that they not only do they not see, but it is accounting for the failure or contributing significantly to the failure of a lot of these businesses?
I would say quite a bit, because if I walk down and talk to the tea sales lady or the children's clothing store, and they're $18,000 over tax and they're making a 5% margin on their goods, they have to do hundreds of thousands of dollars of sales to cover that unfair taxation. That brings to mind the recent budget that came out, and again the province released 2 paragraphs on property taxation. They say we need to protect people from unpredictable shocks in the marketplace, and we need stability in challenging times. And I'm sorry that these things happen, and that happened during COVID, and the you are not creating stability and not accounting for change. That's bad policy, and particularly when it's hurting our small business. And so I don't like statements that suggest stability is created by treating taxpayers unfairly. I think if they knew about it, we would be having a different conversation.
So, and to be clear, just because the province has gone ahead and set a freeze on those assessments, it doesn't mean that the financial need is not there at a municipal level, and they're going to have to make up for it somehow. And that's where we get to the point where whether it's unfair, it's at least hidden in terms of that I'm paying way more than I think I'm paying.
Yeah. And you're sort of knocking on a point, which is taxes aren't frozen. Tax rates are going up, and tax rates are escalating at a much higher rate than ever in the past, because normally what happens is market value increases. It's gone up 108%. Therefore, tax rates can come down. But we've taken that out of the system. It's a government intervention into taxation in the market. And so when you eliminate that piece of the mechanics, the unfairness starts. And that's what's happened.
So now you're making my head hurt, because all of a sudden I'm realizing that the financial needs of the municipality are there, and they're always going to be there. And if, here in Toronto, we've had over the last 3 or 4 years, we've had property tax increases at a residential level at around 25%. And again, I go back to what I said earlier. I'm not sure what I'm getting. I'm not getting 25% more. So if I were a business that was paying that much more, and then on top of it being overtaxed based on the assessment, holy cow, this is way out of wobble.
Yeah, you got it, Dave. And it's our problem we have is it that business people are busy trying to run a business and employ people and be productive, and they I think put trust in government and bureaucracy that they are being treated fairly. And the freeze was brought about for a good reason. It was COVID, and it's been plenty of years since, and that's not the excuse anymore. And the properties that suffered from COVID are suffering the most from this freeze. And that's where the wickedness comes from this policy. It just has to change.
I may be asking you an unfair question. I know you did the survey and you looked at the numbers in the GTA, but do you have a sense across the province in terms of what the overtaxation burden would be on business?
You know, I that one is killing me, Dave, because I have a lot of smart people doing a lot of analysis, and I'm trying to pull that number out of the system. It's going to be billions, and it's it's far more significant in the commercial sector than the residential. The residential is kind of a tighter change, if you like to call it that. But let's take one of my analysis I did on the 12 major shopping centers that sold. So we're doing all of our analysis based off of sales, and we're comparing that to the average change, and we're comparing that to their actual 2016 assessed values. The 12 shopping centers that sold are assessed at $857 million above what they sold for in the past 2 years.
Holy cow.
That's huge. That's $47 million in taxes that they shouldn't be paying every single year. And it's not stopped yet. And so what does that mean to your average small business? $5,000 per door. Every single tenant, every single year, we are paying that we shouldn't be. And this is the type of math that has to be brought to the public, because I can tell you what, people in Canada believe they should pay for the goods and services they receive. And I don't think anybody would think it's right that they're being subsidized by somebody else, especially small business.
Makes me think of there's a sandwich shop that I go to near our family cottage, and we love to go in there. They do great business. It's a great local community place, family run. And I walked in there last week, and there's a sign on the door. It's actually a letter that's on the door. And they're almost apologizing for having to raise the price of their sandwiches. But they explained, this is what's happened since COVID, and the taxes have gone up, and our inflation's gone up, but our wages haven't gone up. I mean, and it was very authentic, and I thought, wow, it made me want to go in all the more and buy 2 sandwiches just because, they needed my help. But it occurs to me that the reason I'm paying more for my veal sandwich is because they're being taxed at a higher rate than they probably should be, and they don't even know it.
That's right. That's right. And, you have this disconnect between our local independent businesses and, higher margin retail business. And we all know that we all want to support our small business, our local businesses. And, those are the ones that don't have the margins that can absorb these types of things. Those are the ones that don't have the volumes they can pass on the costs as readily as your local coffee shop. And, I don't think that residents support this kind of unfairness. And Dave, I'll give you an example. I ran the biggest tax coalition in Vancouver, the Vancouver Fair Tax Coalition, and there was some 50,000 small business members in every real estate organization. We shifted hundreds of millions of dollars from commercial taxpayers to residential taxpayers over 5 years because it wasn't fair. And we did not, we had residents come out and say, oh, you can't do this. And then they heard our story and they were like, no, we're with these guys now. That this isn't right. You should only pay for the goods and services you receive. And when business is paying $2 for every dollar of services they're consuming, it's too much, right?
Yeah. And again, the idea, though, that changing the system means is a complicated issue, and you will know this just because we're going to have to educate people. We're going to have them buy into the idea, because I can see all of a sudden, all right, if they're overtaxed by X percent, at some point we got to make that nut up at City Hall when the budget comes around, and we start talking about it again in November. The costs don't go away, but shifting the burden is what's necessary. It's not going to be easy to convince me that I should be paying more because I'm not getting any more service than I was yesterday. And now all of a sudden, the residential rates are going to have to balance off what commercial rates are doing, right?
Well, okay, let's just be clear here. The residential and commercial buckets are two separate buckets. The burden of taxation is set. We're not asking one class to pay for another class. That does not happen in a reassessment. The amount in the residential bucket stays the same. The amount in the commercial bucket stays the same. It's in that bucket, how does the shift occur? What types of properties and locations of properties will pay more? Which ones will pay less? Okay. So this is not about business versus residential, but you're quite right. There are people that are going to have to pay more, to which I would say two things. How many years should your neighbors keep on subsidizing you? And are you good with that? Because I don't think your neighbors think so. And wait till they figure this out. And point two is there's ways to mitigate the problem. Okay. So it is the province's responsibility to reinstate market value assessment. Bring it in, bring it on. Let's get on track and get going in the right direction. Municipalities have tools, and there are tools all across this country that are used in the instance of value change and how to smooth out tax increases. For example, in Ontario, we do a 4-year phase-in. When we reassess, we bring that new value in over 4 years, or the taxes that go with it. We have tax capping. We can cap everybody at a maximum tax increase of 10% until we've absorbed the problem. In Vancouver, we have another thing called land averaging because land values skyrocketed here. So we average them in on a 5-year average. There's tools to mitigate the change. I don't think Canadians believe their neighbors should be subsidizing each other. That's I think, the unknown here.
Mm-hmm. Well, the other part of this is, and there's a level of trust that goes with this, because if, we have this conversation all this time, for example, at the gas pumps, we've just reduced the taxes on a liter of gas. The prime minister's patting himself on the back, but, everybody is really suspicious that the oil companies just aren't going to come in and absorb that. What's to say that the same thing isn't going to happen at City Hall when we start to look at, your point being, when the value of my property goes up, the tax rate should come down. That's a should. It doesn't guarantee that it will. There's always that willingness to say, look at that. We can actually make more money on at the end of the day by not reducing that rate, even though the property taxes are the values going up.
Yeah. I mean, you're meant to be able to trust government on these types of things, Dave, and the
Good
system.
Luck.
Yeah, I hear you. And the system is meant to work. And, until we educate those people that are getting hosed by this bad policy, I don't think the understanding level is going to reach a point where accountability comes into play. And accountability can be on a couple of different scores. And accountability on municipal budgets is a big part of this conversation because tax rates keep going up and it's hidden in this assessment freeze. And maybe we'll get more accountability on municipal budgets when people are paying their fair share of taxes and start to speak up about things, right?
So the broader issue here is that, and we struggle with this in Toronto, and I know in the larger municipalities, Vancouver, it's always an issue, and particularly because property rates and real estate generally are insane. The idea that there are other tools. So here in Toronto, we have the privilege of paying an extra land transfer tax, which is, another issue just generally in terms of, making real estate available. It becomes costly to actually buy and sell in your own market as a result of it. I don't think a lot of people are realizing that until they get to the point of selling. But there are other tools that have been given to Toronto to raise revenues, and whether they're user fees or typically they're not taxes unless it's like a hotel tax or something, a hospitality tax. Even with those tools in place, which could help with mitigating some of these costs, the provincial government isn't really excited about allowing the municipality to exercise those tools. So there's a real reticence at the provincial level to actually let the municipalities have any level of control or flexibility in how they're managing much of this.
Yeah, Dave, we have this issue in every province, as you say. And boy, no province is more akin to introducing new taxes in British Columbia. We've introduced 7 new taxes on real estate in 8 years. And it was a policy. We were going to crush the demand for real estate. It worked. Didn't get rid of them. Now they've crushed the entire real estate market. I mean, there's other things going on, but these tax policies have not helped. You know, when you come back to property taxes, Dave, we have to realize and remind ourselves that property taxes were designed for core services: police, fire, engineering, planning, finance. They're not designed for social services. They're not designed for the responsibilities of the province. And it's certainly one of my mandates is advocating over core services and getting back to basics so that property taxes can function for the purpose they were designed and not allow the shifting of responsibility between levels of government that continues to occur because we're not holding municipal politicians accountable to the revenues they should be raising for core services.
Yeah, well, and you know, people look at that and say, yeah, public works, I get it. If that's what's the water coming into my house is part of my property tax, I understand that. Picking the garbage up at the curb, I understand that. But to your point, we get into and municipalities are as bad at this as the provinces are at abrogating their own responsibilities and downloading this stuff. And quite frankly, you know, you're back to your survey of the folks along Bloor Street. Listen, I'm just trying to sell coffee here. Leave me alone. I get exhausted trying to keep up with all the other stuff. So there's a fatigue that this actually plays on.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And government intervention is impacting on economic viability of businesses on this. And they don't, you know, our clients, we surveyed them. They're a lot of the property owners. You know, 86% of them say it's unfair. We shouldn't be doing this. 75% of them say we should be assessing properties every year so we can create predictability and have certainty. People are having difficulty doing leasing negotiations. Their pro formas on their developments are risky. It's slowing down development because every input now in a pro forma matters, and this one can really swing on you. And if you think about land value and carrying the land taxes in a pro forma based on the 2016 land value, based on where they should be today, it's hundreds of thousands of dollars we're adding to housing costs. But they're not thinking about it. They're not doing the analysis, and that's what we're doing here.
Well, I would direct folks to your Substack. What's the title of the Substack?
We're Advocacy Canada, Ryan Advocacy Canada. And we try to put one out a week, and we keep them to nice small bite sizes and cover issues that are, I like to think, easy to understand and should hit home with most people. And we're going to continue to analyze market by market and meet with government and keep telling them what they're doing. Well,
you've made a breakthrough with me, so you've reached the lowest common denominator, Paul. So you're doing okay. And for those of you who are interested, and I'm just looking at your homepage here right now for people in this part of the world. A lot of this focusing specifically on what's going on in the GTHA in Ontario writ large. So there's some real value in there, particularly if you're a policymaker or you're a policy wonk or you're just trying to keep your head above water doing business here in the province. Paul, we might bug you again because I suspect this will come up more, and I'll be curious to see what kind of traction this gets here locally as we begin to talk more about it. Thanks for being here.
Hey, thank you for your interest, Dave.